I feel like I've been doing this thing where I do like one episode, then the following one, and they're both roughly about the same themes and topics and everything. But I don't know. This week doesn't have that kind of situation. I don't think I can find something that is that close to cuffing to maintain the trend. But this episode is actually about sex and marriage. A little bit of sex, but a lot more about marriage. Mostly about getting into them and a little bit of getting out. But I don't usually try and talk about the insides of it because I don't have that much experience. So most times it's kind of like me talking out of my ass. But with that said, normally whenever I do an episode and I say it's about sex, I usually give a disclaimer. But in this particular case, I don't think it's that necessary because I won't really be going into that much detail. But I do need to talk about a study first before I get into too many things. Now, there's a very recent study that found that vaping may lower men's sperm counts and shrink their testicles, which to some people sounds like very bad news, but if you're a guy that's trying to not have kids, this sounds like the best piece of information you've ever heard, except for one main thing. Now, just think about it for a second. You're a guy, you like hitting it from the back, or you just like hitting it, and your biggest issue is that probably you don't enjoy using condoms all that much, and you do feel like your pull-out game needs a little bit of help here and there sometimes. So you're scrolling the wonderful virtual world known as the internet, and you come across a study that states that vaping could lower your sperm count. Now, that kind of sounds like amazing information, except that it added shrinking of the testicles. So you think about it and you're like, if the babe wants to teabag me, then that's not great news because it'll probably feel like she's sucking on a Mentos down there. But considering that there's more information about this entire thing, which I need to give, let me just read the caption. So it says, and I quote, "A new scientific study in Turkey suggests that vaping may decrease sperm count and shrink testicles. Authors of the study wrote that it should be considered that although e-cigarette liquid has been introduced as harmless in smoking cessation studies, it could increase oxidative stress and cause morphological changes in the testicle. The test itself was conducted using 3 groups of rats which were exposed to cigarette smoke, e-vapor, and a control group respectively. Regular cigarettes were found to be even worse for men's sperm counts and genital functions." End quote. Now, you kind of think about it for 1 second. Like, if you feel like pulling out is such a hard thing to do, then, you can go and start vaping. But if you feel like vaping in and of itself is too nice of a thing and it's too socially acceptable, then just go and get cigarettes because clearly they make everything worse, And that was even before the study. Although I think the more interesting part is now if you decide to take this entire statistic, then you give it to the Ministry of Health so that they can now start putting additional measures to the guys that manufacture the cigarettes and shit, because those are the more established people. Now imagine them trying to tell people that it causes lower sperm count and reduced testicle size. The way they've been putting up photos of lungs and a liver, or I don't know what it is, and even a dead person on the cigarette pack. Now imagine they're told to add that bit there. People will get their first-hand look at dick not from a science textbook but from a pack of cigarettes when they've gone and gotten it for their uncle or some shit, which is very, very wild. Although even wilder would be where they get the photo of a penis from, but that's sort of besides the point because I don't really think I need to start thinking about dick pictures. What I do need to think about is this podcast, which I should have started in a slightly nicer way, not as wild, possibly with a much better tone, where I say, "Welcome to Breakdown on West Side, your number 1 breakdown podcast, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya." The man on the mic is a man who might have seen a way to not pull out. Because last I checked, vaping doesn't actually have a bad smell, so I can smoke it everywhere. He's a man who used to believe that bukkake was a Japanese form of martial arts. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. This show used to be called 28th Street, and I used to really like it because it was simple. But, Elon Musk changed it to X, and I couldn't call it X Street because it would sound like a porno, and I wanted to add threads, but that still hasn't been done yet, and then it's a lot of organizing I need to do. Either way, the drill is still pretty much the same, and you guys get a chance to add to the making of this episode in some way or another, because I know a lot of you guys see a lot of things that you feel should be discussed on a podcast or just this one. And the drill is pretty simple, almost sounds like a song, and it goes like this. You see that tweet, you like that tweet, you want us to discuss that tweet, you send that tweet. You send it to the DMs of @BagakaTheD, which happens to be my personal Twitter handle, and I will take it from there and I will handle it accordingly. On Facebook and on IG, if it happens to be a screenshot or a screen grab, if it ended up on a reel, it also works. The place to send it to is @BreakTime on my side. The DMs are always open, and I will take it from there and handle it accordingly. Now, I have a couple of cases that I need to get into because I can't just call them tweets, and some of them can have more than just the tweet. And, context is important. But before I can get into the ones that I had already prepped, there was one that I stumbled onto on IG, which I found to be particularly interesting. Now, it was a tweet that was posted up by a lady who goes by the name of Oloni. For those of y'all that don't know who Oloni is, she is an influencer from the UK. She tends to talk about a lot of romance, a lot of sex stuff. She's published a book, recently got married, blah, blah, blah. I don't really give a shit. Now, she posted up a tweet that said, and I quote, "If you cannot ask the guy you're sleeping with for help in and out of an emergency, you shouldn't be fucking him." Now, I don't know, maybe it's just a me thing, but the moment I read this shit, I felt like laughing my ass off. Mostly because I still find it very hard to consider the fact that there's some women that actually still think this way. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you're stupid or dumb. Other people probably will, but I won't say it, at least not on this episode. It's just, when you kind of think about it, it's an equal exchange. What the fuck do you expect the extra for? Like, don't get me wrong, I know that there's guys that might not give you an orgasm, and apparently there's many of those. And there's some that won't make the experience all that great. So, what? Does it mean that you should still be entitled to some sort of help beyond the sex? I still think no. And my reasoning behind this actually goes back to something that my mother said back when I was in high school, actually. So, during that time, it was around the early 2010s and everything, and there was a term that used to be used a lot whenever women would talk about a guy who banged and left, and it was the whole term of "he used me." So, we would hear that quite a bit whenever we're just chilling at home, listening to the radio and all. And at some point in time, my mom just kind of went off and she was like, "I absolutely hate the fact that there's women saying that he used me." And yet that's not the case. It's not like when he was doing it with you, you weren't in control, or you couldn't have said no, or you couldn't have made any decision about it. And it's not like you didn't enjoy it. Like, at the end of the day, when it comes down to those two things, like, you wanted it as well. He just got it and, he moved on. And ever since that time, even though people don't really use that terminology anymore, it's something that I've kind of held close to my heart. The whole, it's not like you felt pain when it was being done. Like, you got pleasure out of it. And if you didn't get pleasure, then probably the person wasn't particularly good at that. But this was an equal opportunity exchange over here. So even though a babe wants to talk about how great her pussy is or how much she made you come, I don't think that it's supposed to really extend beyond the sex. Like, at the end of the day, sex is a two-way street. And yes, some people might go further up the street than others, but at the end of the day, it's a two-way street. So, to be completely honest, it's not really like a guy is obligated to doing anything for you beyond the sex. Like, you come, you give the dick, and you go. That's where your mandate ends. Now, for the most part, if you're going to shag someone, then they're probably a friend, or they're probably interested enough with you, or you guys have interacted well enough to be acquaintances. So, it might be nice to help them. Personally, I feel like you can help them in some cases and in some situations, but it doesn't mean that you have to help them just because they let you hit. Because at the end of the day, and I guess I can also speak for myself on this one, I went and I delivered dick. And it was probably good dick. I don't know if it was good or bad, if it was tiny for you or if it was big. I don't know if I lasted long enough or I barely lasted the right amount of time like a TikTok. But at the end of the day, if I am to give you any help outside of the bedroom and, all we know each other for is the shag, then it'll simply come down to my choosing to do so, not me having to do so just because I gave you dick. Because at the end of the day, in as much as you gave me pussy, I gave you dick. Like, it's an equal exchange. Don't take it for more than what it is. Yes, women hold the keys to sex, but it doesn't mean that just because they hold the keys, they can demand for more than what the sex was and they're entitled to it. Like, at the end of the day, that's just something that I believe, and I feel like people should just be nice to each other. If you're gonna help someone because you're a good person, not because they gave you dick or they gave you pussy. And if you aren't going to help someone, let it not be because they did or didn't give you pussy or dick. Equal opportunity situation. At the end of the day, just be a good person in general. Either way, with that said, I need to get to the cases because there are quite a number of them that I need to get into. So without further ado, we will move it on to our very first case. Now, this was a reply that was based off of a tweet which said, and I quote, "Honestly, dating people in your age group is where it's at." Now, the person who responded to this was a woman, and she said, and I quote, "I've been seeing a man more than a decade older than me, and that ancestral treatment is where it's at." End quote. Now, I don't know, maybe it's just a me thing, but the moment I saw this, I had a little bit of a cringe moment in this. Not that it's bad, it's just when you kind of look at it, especially if you look at a lot of women, you find that their ability or capability to bond well with someone that's much older than them increases as age goes by. Like, you will hear 30, 40-year-old women are with like 45-year-old, 50, 60-year-old men. But that usually tends to vary with age, and you can see in some way it's like it can sort of work. But personally speaking, as a young man, dealing with people of a mostly quote-unquote young age, so at least by my demographics and stats, most of my listeners are somewhere between the 20s and the 30s, so I can speak for that side and probably say that for the most part, I think it's better to date within your age group. Like, I know that there's a bunch of guys out here who talk about going for a woman who's in her early to mid 20s and shit, but personally, I think it's better to date within your age group. And probably if you're a guy, maybe a couple of years younger, so probably maybe 5-ish years younger, or maybe even 7 could be particularly good. I feel like max 10, because by that point in time, I tend to think that that maturity difference might make you harder to relate with a person on the same level. But some people like the whole power thing, but also if you want to go for a babe who's older than you, maybe not too many years older would probably work in your favor. But on the flip side, now with the women, a lot of them would probably prefer someone older than them, and that's why I'd probably flip it the same exact way. Say probably 3, 5, 7, hopefully not more than 10 years above. And if it's a dude that's younger, you can go a couple of years lower, maybe 3 to 5 years or some shit. Because at the end of the day, like, if you're going for someone that's like 15 years younger than you or 15 years older than you, there's not that much for you guys to relate on. Like, at the end of the day, either the younger person's maturity level has to be super high up, or the older person's maturity has to have, slowed down at some point, so they're not as mature. And as a result, that's when, the both of you guys can probably relate particularly well. And that's for the massive age differences. Like, if the age difference is a lot shorter, then you guys can relate better. You guys will understand each other's generation or generations better. And so you guys can actually probably bond and be intimate and actually have much better interactions because the age difference isn't that big. But when you look at people with massive age differences, you find that a lot of times they can't really talk on the same level. So one of them either has to act dumber, or they probably will have trouble trying to get up to that level of thinking. Because also there's generational differences to it. So for example, if it's like a Gen X person who's dating a millennial and the difference is like 15 years and shit, the Gen X might probably be telling the millennial to save up for retirement, and the millennial is busy prioritizing living their best life right now because they don't know if they'll make it to retirement, or they don't know if the savings will actually really be all that useful, or it'll be swallowed up by some form of financial fraud. Like, at the end of the day, those differences will make it such that dating one age group versus another might actually have a little bit of friction to it. Because the only other alternative to it is you guys stick to the intimate shit, you guys let your bodies have the body language, and you don't try to relate with each other on anything beyond an emotional and possibly physical and intimate perspective. You just keep it nice and emotional and intimate, and you don't take most of the other shit beyond. Otherwise, you find that a lot of times people will try to pull the dominance card when it comes to age, and that can sort of work against the younger person a lot of the time, which is something that people don't usually think about. But I figured I might as well just point that out. But either way, maybe I might be wrong about this, because there are people who have managed to do quite well with a massive age difference, even though I think those are outliers. But then again, that's just me. I will leave it at that and move it on to our very next case of this episode. And it is a tweet that says, and I quote, "Before you forgive her for cheating, remember at some point it slipped out and she put it back in. Remember she sucked it and came back hoping to use the same mouth to kiss you so you could have a taste of his D. Remember the other guy asked her if she liked it and she said yeah." End quote. Okay, so I usually kind of like to call this the cheated guy's creed, just mostly because it's one of those things that you kind of have to remember, and I tend to think gets repeated quite a bit. I don't know whether you can say it's repeated mostly online or offline, but it gets said quite a bit by a lot of guys, and it usually relates to when your woman cheats on you and is supposed to deter you from taking her back, but I think it should be used as a cautionary thing to kind of help you with decision making, as opposed to, fully deciding to keep the babe away. And the details usually tend to get played around with a lot. The sort of details in the order that I usually like mentioning it in is she opened her legs for him, he asked her if she liked it and she said yes, and when it slipped out then she put it back in. So, I'd say before you forgive her for cheating, remember at some point she opened her legs for him. Remember at some point he asked her if she liked it and she said yes, and remember that at some point it slipped out and she put it back in. Like, I'd probably stick to those three. Some people can increase the number of things that are there. Some people can add more shit. But essentially, it's supposed to talk about the whole cheating process. And I think for a lot of guys, it kind of puts emphasis on the fact that, as opposed to most guys, when a woman cheats, in a lot of cases, actually, when most women cheat, they usually cheat with everything they've got. Like, they cheat with their entire body, they cheat with like their body, their mind, and so on. As opposed to a lot of guys who will mostly cheat with their dick. It's like, this baby is fine, I'll fuck her, but it's usually just you getting your dick wet, getting your rocks off, but you're still interested, you still care about your babe on this other end. And I'm not saying this to absolve men from cheating or to say that it's better. It's just that when you look at it, like, the guy is just cheating with his dick. But whenever the baby's cheating, like, a lot of times you find that babes will let a guy do way more that they're cheating with, as opposed to their main man. They will let the guy get nastier. They will, tolerate a lot more of the nastiness and the shit that'll happen in the bedroom. But when it comes to the main man, they might not be allowed to do that shit. Hell, the main man might be getting it with a condom, and the dude that she's cheating with is hitting it raw and will even nut inside. Like, for some reason, it's like whenever a babe decides to cheat, it's like it is so disrespectful, and sometimes it can be done with so much spite that they allow way more shit to happen. And this is what the cheated guy's creed actually works to sort of point out very, very well. Because when you kind of think about it, it's almost like the post-nut clarity before you send a babe fare so that she can come over to your place, or before she asks you to do some shit for her just so that you can get sex. Because there's this thing that I've mentioned before that a lot of guys will talk about before, where they're like, before you send her fare, think about whether you really want her to come through. Then go and bust a nut. Go jerk off, bust a nut, and then think about it and ask yourself again whether you want her to come through. If the answer is still yes, then you are supposed to go ahead and bust a nut the second time. Then after that, ask yourself whether it's a good idea for her to come through. If the answer is still yes, then let her come through. Send her the fare, have her come through, do whatever it is that you want to do so that you can get her to come over. Cool. Now, in this particular case, your woman, your partner cheated on you, all right? So they probably apologized and they want you to take them back. And, maybe you said no originally, but, you've started thinking about it. Maybe you're a little bit horny and you missed that affection, and you're thinking about whether you should take her back. Or maybe, she just apologized and she said it wouldn't happen again, and, you're thinking about it at that point in time. repeating the creed actually kind of helps you make a much better decision that probably will remove the potential resentment that might come up in the future because of what she did in the present. Because that shit usually comes back to bite a lot of guys. And sometimes people might use that as ammunition against you and be like, you know what, I fucked your bitch, or that's why your babe cheats on you and shit. And stuff like that is something that you can prepare for by repeating the creed. And the moment you repeat that to yourself a bunch of times and ask yourself if you're comfortable with all of that, if you're comfortable forgiving her, if you can repeat all of that like 2-3 times, and the answer is yes at the end of all 3 of those times, then take her back. Because whatever the hell it is that you think you might feel afterwards, you'll probably be more comfortable with it because you have clearly assessed the situation and you have seen value in having her remain with you, as opposed to you dropping her and having to move on and look for someone else. But then again, maybe I might be wrong about this one as well, but I will leave it at that and I will move it on to our very final case of this episode. Now, it is a tweet that was made by a man, and it says, and I quote, "Single ladies hold a retreat and prayers in wedding gowns in order to find a husband before the year ends. One day, we will have to hold a conversation on why men are not marrying these women. For now, Alam Siki." End quote. Now, in this particular case, I am going to come out and say that I think the main reason why most people today aren't getting married, or most guys today aren't getting married, can mostly be drummed down to about 2 main reasons, as opposed to trying to come up with so many others. The first one is there's very little, if ever, any incentive to get married in today's day and age. If you actually kind of think about it, there's no real visible incentive that comes with marriage. So even when you ask a lot of guys why they'd want to get married, a lot of their answers almost sound like the equivalent of you playing Monopoly and passing Go. So it's almost like a stage that you believe you have to pass as a man and as a person living on planet Earth, because that's the society that you've grown up in. And you can't really blame them for that, because it's not like there's that many visible incentives. For the average guy, you really don't see that much of an incentive for getting married, because if it's sex, you're getting it when you're single or even in a relationship. If it's getting a kid or kids, then look at the number of baby mamas that are out there. Like, I feel like I've heard quite a lot of married individuals, not necessarily the couple, but individuals talking about how they either don't want to have kids, or they want to take some time before they decide to have kids. But the number of women that I have seen getting pregnant and the number of single mothers that are out here heavily outclasses that. Like, there's shit tons of baby moms out here than there are married people that are deciding whether they should have kids or not. So if you've even noticed, for a lot of people's parents, like, a babe can come home and say that she's pregnant and she'll still be kept in the house. Like, she'll still be treated pretty well. Like, as long as the babe is probably even done with school or some shit, like, you go ahead, you get pregnant, and your parents are like, okay, do you know the father, blah blah, y'all can talk this shit out. But they sort of allow you to figure shit out. But back in the day, that wasn't the case. The moment you got pregnant out of wedlock as a babe, it's like your life ended. But right now, you're still accepted by your parents, you're still treated pretty well. Hell, your friends will be there for you, and they'll even be looking forward to the baby shower. Plus, when you look at the number of millennial and zillennial moms that are doing it pretty well on social media, they seem to have buzzing IG accounts, they seem to be getting brand deals, they seem to be doing pretty well for themselves. They could even be professionals and they're doing great. Like, at the end of the day, it makes it very comfortable for a lot of women to have kids outside wedlock in today's day and age, because they won't be ostracized for that shit. So if both sides are comfortable enough with having a kid outside of wedlock and the men don't see any incentive, then that won't really be the case. Now, the second reason is mostly down to the fact that people practice a rent before you buy sort of attitude when it comes to dating these days, where it's sort of kind of like when you look at how people will move around before they settle into the house that they want to own, where it's like they can rent this, they can rent that, they don't mind moving from place to place. But eventually now they will get to a point where they're like, okay, I want to have a house of my own, so I'm going to buy this one and I'm going to stay in it for the rest of my life, and I can have my kids in it and everything. Now, you take that and you implement it in the dating world, and you have a shit ton of people that treat others as disposable. You have a lot of people that are dating this person, being a hoe with this one, still taking this one even though they cheated, or dropping this one because they cheated, moving on to the next one, practicing the whole phase here and there. And then at some point they're like, okay, now I need to get my life together, I'm gonna settle down. And then they suddenly start pulling the whole, oh, I want such and such a person so that I can marry. And for some of those guys, they might go for younger babes. And for some of those women, they might try to trap an older dude, or they might try to be with a guy around that age group that they also did that shit with, who hopefully should accept them for who they are. But you find that a lot of them might end up in this whole single ladies retreat, where they're going in wedding gowns in order to find a husband before the year ends. And that sort of behavior of treating other people as almost disposable kind of ends up making it a lot harder for people to go ahead and decide to actually settle down with one person, because they want to try out the options. Then when they want to settle down with a person, suddenly the people that you were busy treating in a very disposable way are not any of the options that you could have selected as someone to settle down with. Although, then again, I might be wrong about this shit, and I might just be speaking out of my ass since I am not married yet. I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On X, it is at Bagaka the D. On Facebook and on IG, it is at Breaktime on Westside. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.